Well, hello there, gunfighters. Saddle up for a crash course at Gunfighter University, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, equipment, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. More myopically today, let's talk about the 320. Did you know we have had the 320 for going on 10 years, a decade of modularity, the 320. And I think as such, it's worthy of its own episode. We're going to talk a little bit about the 320, its attributes, and its foibles. Anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. I am going to throw in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 2 minutes if you've already heard it before. While you are fast forwarding or listening to the bio, if you could like, subscribe, leave a review, and maybe share this episode with a 320 sommelier if you know one. Somebody that likes a 320 or a SIG fanboy or any iteration thereof. Or somebody considering who's curious about the 320. Consider sharing the episode. Anyway, with that, the bio and the main topic. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. Let us talk a little bit about the development, because it seems kind of strange to jump right into the 320 without comparing it to at the 320. It's not like one day SIG was like, you know what would be cool? The 320. Bam. No, it is a development. It is a fairly linear progression through SIG handguns to bring us to the 320. Now, briefly, the 210. Not a SIG historian. If you want a lot of details on the older, obscure SIGs, and I have no affiliation with them, but Ian at Forgotten Weapons, if you're into the older, more obscure weapons, he does a good job at that. Go check him out. I don't get anything from that. I don't know that he knows this podcast exists. But if you're looking for a cool history of more obscure, older handguns, that's your man. The SIG 210 is a really, really cool gun, especially if you were a master of your craft, if you were an expert at the handgun, because you can really wring out some accuracy. It's one of the very rare target duty handguns. That is a rare combination. You don't see a lot of cops running around with Pardinis in their holster, right? Because most cops, I've said this before, get mad if you want, but I was a cop. Most cops are not gunfighters. They are clerks, they are administrators. Stop with the hero worship and being indoctrinated to think that most cops are gunfighters and they're going to protect you. Cops are clerks, cops are administrators. Cops are a right arm of the magistrate. Some of them are gunfighters, not all. For a professional gunfighter, a really accurate handgun a smooth, accurate handgun can be an advantage. The SIG 210 was like the OG target, really accurate, really slick, shootable target duty handgun. Maybe that should be its own episode, target duty handguns, but let's move on to stick on track today. The SIG 220. The SIG 210 was 9mm. The SIG 220 was 45 single stack. Just a brief aside, if you're looking for a really good single stack because you don't have giant hands, you don't want the obesity that is the Glock 20 or the FNX 45, and you don't want the complexity that is the 1911, look at the SIG 220. It's kind of a forgotten, more obscure weapon for a lot of people, but the SIG 220 is a great single stack, more modernized design of a single stack 45. From that, and I'm not sure which one came and what progression they came, but you get your more modern double stack, what I'm going to call your 70s, 80s era handguns. Consider them like your Beretta 92 adjacent. Alloy frame, so they're lighter, but they're still metal on metal. Alloy frame, double stack, combat cartridge, fighting handguns. I'm talking your SIG 226, your SIG 229s. And these are kind of still the renowned, legendary SIGs of legend. In fact, that's one of my go-to carry guns, the SIG 226. I carried a SIG 229 on duty. These are still, again, kind of renowned as some of the world's best fighting combat handguns ever made by human beings, period. And at the time, this alloy frame that gave you still metal on metal and allowed you to, attach grips and things like that for some modularity. Double stack, modern cartridges. A lot of these will be M40 because they came around, sadly, in the 40 caliber era. But many of them were also in 9mm. There are some other models. There's a double stack 45 and some other things, but the 229, 226 really epitomize this. Somebody might get mad at me if I forget a model or something, but yes, the SIG 228 exists. There's even some really cool East German guns. Now, this was not the only manufacturer making really good handguns at the time. And Glock is not the first striker-fired handgun. It's not the first striker-fired gun. It's not the first polymer handgun. It's not the first polymer striker-fired handgun, probably. What it was the first really commercially successful polymer striker-fired handgun. And that was kind of a market shift. And you see a lot of other companies going, hashtag me too, me too. I want a polymer striker-fired handgun. And SIG actually kind of slow to this party. We saw the Smith & Wesson Sigma and that whole debacle. We saw the Smith & Wesson M&P. We see some other guns. And then we see SIG getting into the polymer market. We see the SIG Pro 2022, which is actually a really good gun, but they kind of went halfway there, right? They went, we'll do the polymer thing, but we really like the hammer-fired system. Now, me personally, I see the wisdom in that. I prefer a hammer-fired gun. I liked them better. I think, again, for a master of the craft, they're a better tool than a polymer striker-fired handgun. So I think the polymer hammer frames don't get the respect they deserve, but SIG came out with the SIG Pro 2022. Never really super successful here in America. They also came out with the kind of failed experiment that is the SIG P250. Now this gun, I'm going to say, is the daddy of the 320. The SIG P250 was a hammer-fired modular, right? Here's where we get this. Hammer-fired modular, polymer-framed, double-stack, combat duty concealed carry handgun. It was double action only. It has one of the smoothest semi-auto double action only hammer-fired triggers you're going to find. It's actually a really good trigger, and I think for duty use, it's a phenomenal gun. But nobody else, well, I shouldn't say nobody. The market didn't really think so. The 250 kind of died. Yeah, that's right. In fact, many of you may not even be familiar with the SIG 250. Again, kind of dead, kind of died on the vine. Not that they weren't produced and they're not still out there, but they're rare. But they're so much a dad of the 320. I believe they take the same magazines. I believe, I could be wrong, but I think they even take the same grip modules. So what it was this modular chassis system, but instead of the striker-fired one you're familiar with, it was a hammer-fired gun. And so what do? When that fails, you take a lot of that R&D, I think, and a lot of that modularity concept, and instead of a drop-in hammer-fired system, you get a drop-in striker-fired system, because everybody wants a striker-fired, which to me seems like the inferior option. But that's what people want. People think polymer striker-fire, polymer striker-fire. Flavor of the week, American Hi-Fi, good song. But that's what people wanted, and ironically, the 250 was a flop, and the 320, the polymer striker-fired modular handgun, is a massive, massive success. Now, it wasn't the day that it dropped. It wasn't like a massive market overtake. But if you look at successful polymer striker-fired handguns today, it is one of the more successful ones. Now, it doesn't rival Glock in pure sales, but it's up there. And that's pretty cool. So we get this development, and we end up with the 320. Now, the 320 has a whole slew of variants. There is a subcompact version that is not real common. In fact, last time I was asking about people at it in a fairly big gun store, they didn't even think that it existed. I know that it exists because I know that it exists. It's just not real common. A lot of people today want the carry, whatever they call it, which I don't really like that whole concept as far as a size gun. But they do make a subcompact, make a compact, they make full size, they make long sides, they make competition versions, they even make an X5 version. And there's all kinds of sub-variants in between. There is a just giant variety of 320s. What I think even solidifies the success of this gun now and in the future, generally when the military adopts something, it becomes popular. Look at most of the popular things we have today. They were either, well, the vast majority were police or military cartridges and or guns. 1911, 45 ACP, 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, 357 SIG, 38 Special, 357 Magnum. There are a ton of other calibers introduced, but the real successful ones were mass adopted by military and or police. The M17, M18 won the XM17 handgun trial. It beat the competitors. I'm not getting into whether I agree with that or not. I'm not going to get into that. It'd be its whole episode on what I think about that trial and who won and who didn't win. But it won. All right. So to the victor go the spoils. The fact that it won, and it is, and the M17 is, for all intents and purposes, a 320 with a thumb safety. That's basically it. There's really no other difference. The fact that it did win, and it is the handgun of all the branches of the armed forces. There are exceptions. There are special units who use special stuff. But U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, right? These guys are using the M17, M18. And that solidifies the success of this platform for the foreseeable future. Whether it's good or bad, when the, let's say, civilian community sees that the military is using something, a lot of people want to jump on that bandwagon. And a lot of people have. In fact, I myself, when I was starting on this whole, I want to run an optic on my carry gun, I for a long time trained, and I was against actually optics on a handgun for a long time, longer than I should have been. And I started training, and what I would advise you to do dry fire and do a lot of training with a 22. And once I realized, yeah, this is better. This is a force multiplier. Then I got a really good deal on a used M17. It was like 400 and something bucks. And I thought, you know what? One, I'll get to train with a center fire 9mm carry gun, beat the crap out of it, as I often do with the carry gun and guns I train with, and I get to try the military's new handgun. I didn't want to like it. I'm going to be honest with you. I did a whole episode, The Gun That I Hate to Love. And after months and months of training with that thing, I still have it. I didn't just beat the crap out of it and sell it. I mounted it with a Trijicon RMR, co-witness iron sights. It's a good gun. It's a good handgun. And I didn't want to believe that, but it is. Try and use equal weights and equal measures and not just go by bias. Because I still don't know that I think it should have won the handgun trials, but it's a good gun. It is a good gun. I was familiar with the 320 well before that, but I got the M17 largely because it was a good deal on a used handgun, and I wanted to, again, train with a center fire gun with an optic, and I wanted to try the military's new handgun. And I really, really like it after like a year. I'm really impressed with it. I hit that year mark a long time ago. I did that episode a long time ago. It's a good handgun. And that's a good place to transition to what's good about it and what's really not good about it. Let's start with the not good. Okay, the gun with a trigger so good, it shoots itself. Right? There is a reason that I tell you guys, and I have for a long time, not this specific example, but I learned the hard way several times. Don't buy a gun when it first comes out. Let it be proven. The early editions of the 320 can go off without you pulling the trigger. That's a real thing. Notice I said the early generations. If you are still a Luddite and you think that all 320s or M17s are unsafe, I mean, there were plenty of early generation Glock 40s that blew up. Do you say the same thing about Glock? Probably not, right? The early generations, and again, there's a reason I tell you to stay away from a new design when everybody comes out with all the gun tubers, this new hot gun, you gotta grab it. Probably wait, right? Do you want to test your life to something unproven? Probably not. If you just want it as a hobby gun, if you're just gonna go pew pew pew, plinking at the range, that's fine. Whatever, right? If you're gonna trust your life and somebody else's life to a gun, it should be proven. And my general rule for that is 3 years. If it's got issues, somebody's gonna find out about it. It probably shouldn't be you on perhaps the worst day of your life. So the 320, the early versions could go off without you pulling the trigger. Without getting too far down the rabbit hole of physics, that has to do with every action has an equal and opposite reaction and inertia. And the fact that the trigger does not have an independent segmented portion. If you look at the Glock, the middle of that trigger has that segmented portion. That is for this very reason. If you hit the gun really hard, that trigger, when the gun stops, the trigger still wants to move to the rear. But it cannot do that because of that little dangly bit that's segmented in the middle of the trigger. Now, I'll be honest, I think the Glock has got horrible ergonomics on that part of the trigger. Some triggers do it much better. I much prefer the M&P way that they do that. They segment it the other way. Instead of vertically, they do it horizontally. I like that better. It gives a flatter, smoother trigger, in my opinion. There are some other guns that do it well. The Canic Rival, to give credit where it's due, they do that really well. But the SIG 320 M17 doesn't do it at all. Now, if you're talking about the M17 or a handgun with a thumb safety, which I actually prefer to crap on the mainstream, what people generally think of for a carry gun, I think a thumb safety favors the, again, kind of the master of their craft. But if you get one without that, one of the early versions, it was possible because the trigger had enough mass and was light enough that if the gun stopped abruptly, the trigger could still move to the rear and fire the gun. And for whatever reason, and I don't know why, I remember thinking that early on, like, why doesn't this have that? Most other polymer striker-fired handguns, even with far worse triggers, have that. It seemed to me a bad idea anyway, even if it didn't have drop safe issues. It just seemed like a polymer striker-fired handgun with no safety with a trigger that light was kind of a bad idea. That said, you can get it with a safety, and the more modern versions of it, the later generations of it, any other ones you're going to find in the past several years, don't have that issue. They changed some trigger components, so that's not possible. There's not going to be enough inertia left in that trigger to keep it moving rearward. And I don't think any of the military versions ever had that problem. But that was a real thing that really happened. How often that actually happened versus how many people did that specifically to get clicks on social media, that you'll have to do your own research. But it is actually a possibility on the very early versions of the 320. Again, that's why I say stay away from guns when they first come out. Lots of guns have problems. Some early Glocks. Right? So it's not unique to them. But I just saw Taurus came out with a thing, a bunch of their handguns they did a recall on for drop safe stuff. So that's the bad. Some other bad things about this from my perspective. It is more complicated than a Glock. If you look at an exploded view, and some people didn't know what that was, I thought pretty much everybody would know what an exploded view is. If you look at a diagram where all the parts are like taken apart and laid out and they've got these little lines to show where they go, you look at an exploded view of a 320 versus a Glock and you're like, whoa, there's a lot more going on here. That is true. The lot more going on also leads to a lot more things that can go wrong because all those parts have to interact. That's one of the, and I'm not a Glock fanboy, you guys probably know that if you listen. However, I'll give credit where it's due. Much like the AK-47, one of the good things about the Glock lies in its simplicity. It's got very few moving parts for a modern semi-automatic handgun. The 320 is more complex. It has the potential for more issues. Notice I said potential. So it's got more moving parts, it's got more going on there. Just look at a striker assembly. Like take out the striker assembly of a 320 versus a Glock. There's a lot more going on just in the striker assembly, and that's just one part. Also, if you're into accuracy, and I am, and the SIG 320, to be fair, M17, I don't know how, but it seems to be very accurate. That being said, if you look at, because it's modular, the rails on the top and bottom of the gun are pretty close together, and they ride on a very small portion of metal teeth, much like a Glock. Glocks are not very accurate. The SIG 320 M17, I don't know, because it's made better, tighter tolerances, whatever, it does seem to be fairly accurate. But I don't like that. I like a full-length rail. If you look at the older models, like we talked about the SIG 226, basically the vast majority of the slide rides on one big kind of monolithic set of rails on the frame. I like that better. Because it's modular and that's one little piece, those four teeth, for lack of a better term, which are kind of a rail, they ride inside the rail, they're pretty close together. Not a big fan of that. I don't know that it's caused any issues, and again, it seems to be a very accurate platform. I just don't like it, if I'm being honest. Also, there's another potential big problem if you don't know what you're doing with many of, not all of, but many of the 320 variants, M17, M18, that are optics ready. Unlike the vast majority of other things I'm familiar with, and I've done a lot of optics mounting on different handguns. One of my jobs I don't normally mention in the bio, but fairly recently I was the manager of a firearms training company, and as such I was also employed sometimes as a professional gunsmith. A lot of that nowadays has to do with mounting optics on handguns, so I got a lot of experience on different optics mounting systems. The SIG, for whatever reason, they thought it was a good idea to have screws go in from the bottom inside the slide. Now, most other systems only have screws coming in from the top. If they get loose, it's certainly going to affect how well the optic is mounted on the gun, but it's not going to fall inside the gun and lock the gun up, seize the gun up, break the gun. Screws that go in from the bottom, they can loosen, come out, fall out, and certainly cause a malfunction, or at least give you a catastrophic malfunction, meaning you cannot fix that in the field. Kind of like you're in the middle of a gunfight and you tap, rack, bang, and nothing happens. Right? You're not fixing that. So that's a problem. Now, it's a really simple problem to fix, and a lot of people that I would think would have the knowledge have pointed this out. This is like a fatal flaw. But it's called blue Loctite, and it costs like $6 a tube. And if you consider yourself a gun person, a shooter, somebody that trains, and you don't have Loctite in your range bag, kind of like one of those things, tell me you're a newbie at shooting and training and gunfighting without telling me you're a newbie. Let me look in your range bag and not see Loctite. Right? It's just one of those things. It's like you look in your range bag, you should see an Allen wrench set, a torque set, some kind of multi-tool, tape, Loctite, right? Just a staple. When you get that gun, even if it's brand new, right? That's one of the things, like when you get a brand new gun out of the box, read the manual, take it apart, clean it, reassemble it, and if it's got screws, put blue Loctite on them. If you don't put the blue Loctite on, if you don't clean the screw holes, apply blue Loctite on clean threads and clean holes properly to proper torque specs, especially if you're going to mount an optic, I would say that's a fault of you. You should do that. That said, it is an inferior design. It is an inferior design, I think, in my opinion, to have screws go up from the bottom rather than come down from the top. So that potential issue, again, put some Loctite on it. Blue, not red. Now, what do I really like about the 320 M17? It's got great ergonomics. The ergonomics of the 320 are not even close to a Glock. A Glock I've likened before to a 2x4. It's got horrible ergonomics. It's got a horrible grip angle. Unless you just train a ton with a Glock and you're just used to that grip angle, it's got a very unnatural grip angle for me, and I think the majority of people. It's also fairly fat and pregnant for a gun grip, even the smaller frame, normal frame Glocks. So Glocks have never been known. They've been known for a lot of good things, but not ergonomics. The 320 M17 has better ergonomics. Also, I like the option that I can, without doing something crazy to the gun, get a safety, a manual safety on the gun. I like manual safeties on carry guns. I know that bucks the trend, but I think for the trained person, it favors the trained fighter on a duty carry handgun, especially in CQB fighting over a gun type scenarios. And if you're well versed in it, I don't think it adds any extra time or any extra complexity if you're used to running a gun with a thumb safety. Some of the best, fastest competition shooters in the world run 1911s. In fact, the 1911 2011s have their own, as somebody that's done a lot of competition shooting, they have their own divisions. Not so they're still relevant in 2024 with all these new polyguns, but because they're faster and the other guns do not compete with them. That's why they have their own separate division. So people with their hashtag MeToo polymer striker fired guns have a place to compete without getting spanked by 1911s and 2011s. And yes, I know sometimes you'll get a Gucci tricked out Glock that runs in limited division. I'm aware of that. But that proves the point that, you know, thumb safety, manual safety handguns are not slow. I like the fact that I can get an M17 320 with a manual safety and a good ergonomic manual safety too. I like that. I also like the chassis system. I don't know why the military wanted that. I don't see a lot of use for that in the military. I don't think that as somebody who was, infantry in the military and I carried a handgun in a sandbox, I don't see the armor being like, you know what, Private Smith, what do you feel like your handgun grip size is? Let me measure you and issue the appropriate grip size. That's not how that works if you weren't in the military. You go up to a cage and they say, sign for this. This is yours now. If you lose it, you go into the brig. Right? They don't care whether the gun fits you or not. How many left-handed AR-15s does the military issue out? The answer is 0. If they don't care that much about your primary gun, how much do you think they care about your secondary handgun fitting you? Maybe if you're a major or a general, maybe they would do that for you. But the average private, I don't see them measuring your hand to see what grip size you want. I could be wrong, but I don't see that being a normal thing. But for you, their well-regulated citizen, I think it is a big deal. In days of yore, and what I would do is take a Dremel to my older handguns or stipple them And if I ruined it, I was out the entire frame, which is the serialized part of the handgun. Now, with the SIG 320, not only is it modular, and this is a big deal, not only is it modular, there's actually a bunch of SIG support and aftermarket support for that handgun. You guys remember, I'm not going to call it a flop yet, but the brand new, really cool bunch of people were pushing it on you, Springfield Echelon. I'm not going to say it's dead, but it's certainly not overtaking the market. It's supposed to be not just another polymer #MeToo polymer striker fired handgun. It's supposed to be another #polymer striker fired modular handgun. That said, I'm not aware of a bunch of people making aftermarket slides, aftermarket frames, aftermarket barrels, different calibers. So what point is the modularity if you only have the one version, right? It's modularity in theory only. The SIG 320 actually is modular, right? You can go to Wilson Combat and get a grip. You can go to Polymer 80 and get a grip without having to get a whole new gun. You can order it and have it sent right to your door, right? So if you got one gun, you want to do different things, you could even drop it into like a PDW, PCC, pistol caliber carbine type thing and have the same fire control group. You can go from a full-size, duty, even long-slide competition gun to again, we talked about the subcompact variant, like a Glock 26 size with one serialized handgun. That's pretty cool. That, I think, is a big deal. And you can keep all the other parts and go back. Like I can take, this is not unique to me, I didn't think of this, but you can take, up until recently it wasn't offered by Glock, but people have been doing for years, is take like a Glock 17 and cut it down to a Glock 19 size grip. But then you can't go back, right? Once you do that and cut that grip module with a Dremel, you're stuck with that. But you can, with a 320, say one day you want a full size, one day you want a compact, one day you want to run a long slide, one day you want a 357 SIG, one day you want to rocket 9mm, you can go back and forth. So for the well-regulated citizen, I think that is a big deal, that modularity, if you can actually leverage it. I also see this, I was asked by a listener, a fan of the show, if I can call him a fan, still current LEO, law enforcement officer. He asked me what I thought the ideal mass issue gun was for a big department. And I said, probably this 320 M17. For that reason. While I don't think the military is going to do that and be like, what grip module would you like today, Private Smith? I can see a big agency with, let's say, a 90-pound Asian cop, female. Yes, I'm going to specify her gender. 90-pound Asian female. Call me a stereotypical chauvinistic male. I don't care. But a 90-pound Asian female, right? And a 250-pound corn-fed North Dakota Viking descendant dude that's, 6'5" and 250 pounds of muscle. They probably don't have the same size hands, like it or not. They probably shouldn't have the same size handgun, like it or not. If you're going to have the handgun that you issue them, and they're going to have it for years, right? They might, you hope, if you're hiring them as a cop, they're going to stay with you for 20 years. Now, we might not issue that same handgun for 20 years, but you get the idea. For years, they're going to have that handgun. The fact that I can have the same fire control unit and the grip modules are cheap and give the female the small and give the big corn-fed Viking dude a large, right? You kind of see the advantage there. For a big police department, I could see that as being an advantage. Now, side note, what I think is even better than that, if you're going to run a department, let the guys, make the guys, the people, buy and train with their own handguns. Give them the freedom to choose the best platform for them. Not what you think it should be, but what it actually is for them. Anyway, I do think the modularity can be a big deal. And it's the only still modular handgun that I'm aware of with actual good aftermarket and Sig Sauer support. Right? Go on the Sig Sauer website. I'm not sponsored by Sig Sauer. I'm not a Sig Sauer fanboy. But they've really kind of taken the market by storm. You can go to their website and kind of build your own gun, right? You can build your own 320 variant, M17 variant with special order, right? Like the Burger King of handguns, have it your way. If you're old enough to remember those campaigns, I don't know if they still do that. I don't have a TV, nor do I eat at fast food places, unless you count McDonald's coffee. Sometimes I'll get a McDonald's coffee, which is pretty good coffee. But anyway, now you know. Or you can go to the SIG website and kind of build your own 320. There might be other polymer handguns, but you can't really do that unless you consider we talked about the 250 being the daddy of the 320. You might consider the M17 like the brother of the 320. Well, you might consider the 365 the son of, the child of the 320. It's the same. It's like the polymer striker-fired modular handgun system shrunk down. A lot of people think of the 320 as modular, but they don't think of the P365 is modular, and if you take the fire control units out of both, you'll see striking similarities. One just kind of shrunken down to be thinner, smaller. But again, I would consider that kind of a child of the 320. But with the exception of SIG, I'm not aware of any modular handgun systems that have that level or even close to that level of aftermarket support or support from their own company. Again, a theoretically modular gun doesn't really matter if you can't get any extra barrels, extra slides, extra frames for the gun, different calibers, all those things, right? It doesn't really matter. But with the 320, you do get that. Also, a couple of things. One other small thing, because most people are like, Glock perfection. We'll change the factory sights on their Glock. But the SIGs, for a long time, and the 320 M17 is no exception, come with much better, factory sights than most guns. So there is that. They come with what I would consider good usable combat sights. Also, the trigger is, for a striker-fired handgun, really good. For a polymer striker-fired gun. I would think of what analogy can I use? If I consider the Glock trigger like a giant, rotten, mushy carrot that just squeaks and groans and grits until it eventually breaks somewhere at some point. And I consider the 1911 like a thin, elegant glass rod that just breaks all at once, beautifully, predictably. Then the 320 trigger would kind of be like a piece of spaghetti, like a dry piece of spaghetti. Like it's got a little bit of bend, a little bit of take up, then it snaps. It's not a 1911, but it's certainly better than a Glock. The 320 M17 trigger, if you got to run a polymer striker-fired handgun, it's up there for some of the best factory triggers. Right out of the box, the 320 has a really, really good factory trigger. In my opinion, you're going to have to do quite a bit of work to a 1911 to get it to have a trigger as good as a 320 M17. It's got a good trigger. It's maybe not the best anymore, but it's really high up there. I would probably still put it in the top 3 to top 5 of polymer striker-fired handguns. And they may not seem like that much, but there's a ton of polymer striker-fired handguns on the market. It's just kind of ridiculous. That being said, it's really good for a polymer striker-fired handgun. Again, not as good as a hammer-fired gun, but for a polymer striker-fire, it's pretty good. And by good, I don't just mean light. There are a lot of light triggers that are really bad. It's a decent trigger. Those are the big attributes, in my opinion, for the SIG 320 M17 platform. Again, been around 10 years. And probably going to be, unless, it's the end of the world as we know it in a couple of years, or this year, elections coming up or whatever, I don't see the future, right? But I try and watch and be ready. If current trends continue, it's probably going to be a dominator in the market for the next 10 years. Again, I don't see the future. I don't know what the future holds, but it's the military handgun. And when the military adopts something, while it has it, and even for a while afterwards, it's kind of a staple in the gun community. Look at the AR-15. Look at the 1911. That stopped being our service weapon in the 80s. It's still a big chunk of the market. A lot of that's because the patents expired and because it's a really good design. But was just some trials pistol that didn't win the handgun trials in 1911, I doubt a bunch of companies would still be making it. The fact that the M17, M18 was adopted, that says something, and it probably, again, as long as current trends continue and we have our Second Amendment rights and we still live in a post-industrial modern manufacturing society, which I don't know if that's going to be true or not, but if those things continue, I would likely see the M17, M18 continue to be a big staple in the market. And again, I don't see the future, but it's a force to be reckoned with in the handgun world. So I think that's a pretty good episode. I think that's maybe not all-encompassing, but pretty encompassing of the 320 platform. I hope you enjoyed this content. Hope you enjoy the show. If you do, again, like, subscribe, leave a review. If you appreciate a non-biased, not bought and paid for opinion, just trying to push a new gun on you, not taking a bribe, because a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous, the Bible says. It doesn't say twist the words of the crooked and the twisted and the evil. It says twist the words of the righteous. You just have a different perspective on something when somebody's paying you to say something, right? If you appreciate honest content, I have my thoughts and biases and stuff too, but at least they're not bought and paid for by a gun company or by a giant media conglomerate. If you appreciate that, hopefully you will step up and support and become a patron. Support the show. Patrons get a lot of cool insider-only content as well. Mostly I want you to support because you believe in the show and you believe in, independent content put out in a good Christian worldview without a bunch of swearing and taking the Lord's name in vain and just disgusting stuff that seems to be everywhere in our culture. Mostly I want you support for that, but patrons get a lot of insider-only content. Recently, we were talking about, this morning, I gave my views on the Lakewood church shooting because one of the guys posted a video from the security footage of that shooting and how it went down. And as I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters and an urban warfare instructor, kind of gave my thoughts on that whole incident. If you want to hear those thoughts, that's just one of the things. For $5 a month, you can become a patron. That's just one of the things we talked about and went over. Just a small example. They get a lot of insider-only episodes as well that you're just not going to get. If you want to be part of that, become a patron. All right, enough of that. Your tactical tip of the day. Besides, put blue Loctite on your threads if it is for a fighting gun, period. And use a torque wrench. More is not better when it comes to torque on gun screws. Ask me how I know. If you didn't know this already, this one tip could literally take you to the next level in handgun shooting. I'm not even kidding you here. This one tactical tip could pay for years of Patreon right here. If you've never had somebody explain this to you, okay, if you're a man, and I assume you are, I don't give a crap as a handgun instructor how that gun feels in your hand. You're not a woman. Stop living on feelings. Slap yourself if you care about how the handgun feels in your hand. I don't care how it feels in your hand. Stop. You're a man. You're a man who should identify as a man and have some man parts. I don't care about your feelings. How the gun feels in your hand is irrelevant to me. How the gun fits in your hand is very important to me. As a shooter, as a firearms instructor, when you hold that gun in your hands, your wrist should be straight and locked, right? Because you're trying to shoot fast and accurate. If you don't know to lock your wrist, you really got to take a training course or something. But with your wrist locked straight, canted down, hold that handgun in your hand. There should be a straight line from the front sight going down the rear sight, up your arm, through your elbow, and into your shoulder. A straight linear line. You should be able to, at this point, naturally wrap your finger around, and the center of the pad of your finger should rest on the center of the pad, that little swirl that you have on your trigger finger. That is a beautiful blessing of an index point to make sure the center of your pad goes on the center of that trigger. If that gun does not do that, and you have to cant it one way or the other, instead of that recoil going all the way straight and linear up your arm into your shoulder and into your body, you're going to have to either cant it one way so it goes into your hand and torques your wrist, or the other way so it goes into your thumb, and now you have all the recoil of that gun going into one finger and torquing it sideways. Either one of those is not as good. Either one of those is subpar. Can you shoot a handgun like that? Yeah. Can I shoot a Glock 21 good? Yeah, I can shoot it good, but I can't shoot it as good as the gun that fits me. Again, I don't care how it feels. Some guns that I shoot really well feel awkward. Doesn't matter. That matters. And if you understand that and get a gun that actually fits you, then you can drive it way faster. That is important. So if you didn't grasp that, go back and listen to that section again. That is important. How the gun feels in your hand, I don't give a crap. You're a man. I don't care if it gives you calluses. You should have calluses. You're a dude. What I do care is that you get a good recoil control and natural point of aim, and that the gun returns and you get more of your body mass to control that recoil. That's what I care about. And that depends on the size and shape of the gun for the person. Okay, that's your tactical tip of the day. This is from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy meaning the law again. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. Don't add to it or take away from it. What God says is good and right and just is good and right and just. There is no social justice. That's a garbage, modern vomit of today's culture. There is only true justice and mercy. Encouraging somebody to live a lie or encouraging them to live in sin is not merciful. It is evil. It hurts them. And you might make them feel good, right? Just like you giving a heroin addict heroin can make them feel good, but it's destroying them. You telling somebody that their sin is okay and embracing their sin and their modern lifestyle, living their best life, if it's sin, you are not loving them. You are not merciful to them. You are hurting them. You are encouraging their demise. There is no social justice. There is only true justice. Do not add to what God said or take away from it. He decides what love is and what justice is because he made those things. And he decides what they are and are not. Not culture, not society, not the government. God. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day.